Alright, so today we're going to continue simplifying expressions. We're just going to look at some that have a couple more steps, or maybe we could consider more difficult, but I think difficult's a funny word for this. It just is more involved. I don't necessarily think it's more difficult in terms of how hard is it to get the right answer. There's just a little more involved. So far we've talked about combining like terms, and we're still going to do that. And that was when we could put things together that had the same variable or didn't have a variable at all. And then we also talked about distributing. And that was when we had parentheses and there was a number being multiplied by the quantity that was inside parentheses. We talked about how we can multiply the number on the outside times everything on the inside and then create a more simplified expression without parentheses. So we're really going to continue doing all of that today. But what makes today more difficult is there's going to be more than one variable. So there could be an x and a y. And then we're also going to look at some where there's more than one set of parentheses. Okay, so that's what makes today different from what we were doing. So we're going to do the first two as a warm-up, and then we'll jump into the new stuff. So going back to what we've been working on, number one, we've got 4 terms in this expression. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Each term separated by a subtraction or an addition sign. So 13n is a term, 18 is a term, 3n is a term, and 4 is a term. So we can combine like terms. They're like if they have the same variable. So this 13n can combine with this plus 3n, and the minus 18 can combine with the minus 4. Now notice, just a reminder, when I boxed these in or circled them in, I included the plus or the minus that's in front, and I'm going to consider that a negative or a positive. So this is a negative 18 and a negative 4. This is a positive 13 and a positive 3. I can only combine like terms now. So the like terms are in the boxes and the circles. So the n's can be combined because they have the same variable. So that's 16n. And a negative 18 and a negative 4 is a negative 22. And I write that as minus 22. And I make sure that my final expression is in the correct order, which means any term that has a variable comes first, and the last term would be a term that does not have a variable. Now sometimes that doesn't exist, but if there is a term with no variable, that goes last. Alright, so nice easy one from last week. So if we look at number 2, same idea. You've got an n here, and you've got an n here. I'm going to make sure that subtraction sign gets included. And I've got a plus 2 and a plus 1. So I need to combine everything I can. Negative 18 and negative 8, when you put that together, that's negative 26n. And plus 2 and plus 1 is a plus 3. Final answer. So combining like terms. So as I jump now to number 3 and I start boxing things in, I'm going to start with my r's. You can start with whatever, it doesn't matter. And then I've got a 1 and I've got a plus 1, but now all of a sudden I've got this extra term. I have 3 different types of terms. I've got r's, I've got an s, and I've got just regular old numbers. So that means my final answer is going to have 3 different terms because I can't put an r with an s. If you put them together, you're saying that it's the same thing, and they're not. If I gave you values to plug in, I told you r equals 2 and s equals 3, that just shows you I can't plug in the same number for both of them. Now it is possible to have the same value for both of them, but most of the time they're not. So you cannot combine an r with an s. You keep them separate. So right now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 terms. And since we have 3 different types of terms, our final answer is going to have 3 terms. So we're going from 5 terms, and our final answer will have 3 terms. So that's not a huge change, but it is simpler. Less terms is simpler. All right, so when I list these, just like over here I listed the variables first and then the numbers, that's still going to be true. So when I get this plus 2, that's going to be the very last thing. plus 2 is going to go at the end of my expression. But now I'm going to have two other terms, one with an R and one with an S. And so there is a rule for this. You're going to put them in alphabetical order. So if you think about your alphabet, it goes Q, R, S. So R comes before S. So when I list these, R comes first and then S. So let's look at the R. Negative 15 plus 6, that's a negative 9R. And now this S, if there were more S's, I'd combine it with them, but there's no other S. So it's just going to stay. So there's going to be a plus S. Make sure your S doesn't look too much like a 5. Make it small so you're not going to get confused there. This is your final answer, negative 9R plus S plus 2. So it's really the same thing we've been doing. You're just going to combine the letters that are the same. Don't combine an R with an S or an X with a Y. So if I jump over to number 4, I have an X, and I find another X over here. I've got a Y, and I've got another Y, and then I've also got a plus 17. So 3 different types of terms. So my answer is going to have 3 terms. So first, starting with my X's, negative 17X plus 10, that's a negative 7X. This is a negative 11, and this is a positive 1. So if I added 1 to negative 11, I get negative 10. So it's negative 10y, which I write as minus 10y. So remember, if I get a negative, I put a minus. So not minus negative 10, it's just a minus 10. And this plus 17 does not have anything to combine with, so the plus 17 just gets tacked on the end. And that's done. So remember, the point of this is we've made a simplified expression. If we plugged into this the X and the Y value, we'd get the same answer as if we did up here, but this is more complicated. It would take you longer to figure out. This is easier to work with. Okay, so number 5. I've got an A. I've got another A. I'm going to put the plus inside of it. I've got a B. I don't see another B. I've got a C and another C. And then I've also got a regular old number, so I'm going to put even another shape there. Remember, if the shapes don't help you, you don't need to do it that way. If you have highlighters, you can put them in different colors. A lot of students prefer to use highlighters. Or you can just look at it. Okay, this is not required, but it is a nice tool. So it needs to be alphabetical order. I'm going to start with my A's. I have a 2A here, and this is a 1A. So altogether, that's 3A. When I look at my B's, I've only got 1. So there's nothing to combine it with. It's just going to stay. So 11B. Make sure your B doesn't look like a 6. C's, I've got a 14 that's positive, and I've got a negative 4 or a minus 4. So that negative or minus comes off of the 14. So that's going to leave me positive 10. So plus 10C. And this minus 6 is the only triangle. There's no other triangles. It's the only whole number that doesn't have a variable. So the minus 6 just gets tacked on the end. So 4 different terms. So I have 4 terms in my final answer. 16. Here's an R. Here's another R. Here's an S. And then here's 2 whole numbers. So I have 3 different shapes here. 3 different types of terms, so my answer will have 3 terms. R comes before S, I'm going to start there. 19 and 20 is 39R. This is the only S, so that just stays. And a minus 4 and a minus 3 is a minus 7. Final answer. Okay, so really it's not too much different than what we were doing. There's just going to be more terms in my final answer. Make sure you're only combining a variable with a like variable. Okay, so then we looked at distributing. Let's run through 2 quick review distributing problems, and then we'll look at some ones that involve a little more. So number 7, we talked about the number on the outside can be multiplied by both terms on the inside. So a negative 8 times a negative 5 is a positive 40. Remember, that's a negative, and a negative makes a positive. And a negative 8 times a positive is going to be a negative, so I can put the minus there right away. And the 8 times the 2 is 16, and the x stays with it. So I can't leave this as my final answer, because this term with the x needs to go first. The whole thing needs to go up front. The minus 16 is like a negative 16, so it's negative 16x. And this is a positive 40, so it needs to say plus 40. So these two are equivalent. The minus is a negative, the positive is a plus. All right, you could have jumped to this as your final answer. You don't need to show the middle step. When you're distributing, if you see that the x is going to be my first term, I can do that first. Negative 8 times 2 is negative 16, put it up front. And then a negative 8 times a negative 5 is positive 40, put it at the end. So if you can see that jump right away, just go ahead and do it. So number 8, we looked at these right before break. We've got this extra little plus 4 that's not affected by the distributing because the 3 or the negative 3 is getting multiplied by everything on the inside. But this 4 is just a plus 4. So it actually hangs around for one more step. So you can bring the plus 4 down. And we're multiplying here. So negative 3 times negative 4 is positive 12. And then a negative 3, this is a negative 6. If you need to circle it so it makes sense. Negative 6. So a negative and a negative is going to be another positive plus 18m. And so for these, we found out we had one more step. We had to combine like terms. This is the only m. I'm going to put that up front. But I've got a 12 and I've got a plus 4. So you put them together and that's plus 16. And now you're fully simplified. So looking now at the new stuff for today. I've got 2 sets of parentheses. It's not any different. I'm not going to teach anything new. It's just how do I deal with all of this in one problem. So this 6, since it's attached to the parentheses, is being multiplied by everything on the inside. And this 5 being attached to this set of parentheses is being multiplied by everything here. So I'm going to get 2 terms when I multiply this. And I'm going to get 2 terms when I multiply this. So I'm going to have a total of 4 terms. And they're going to need to be simplified after that. So it's going to end up looking like one of these for my first step, and then I'm going to go ahead and get it all the way to the end. So when I multiply here, 6 times 5m is 30m. 6 times negative 6 is negative 36. Now before you bring this plus down, that plus really just goes with the 5 and makes it positive. So when I start multiplying, I could end up with a negative. So I don't want to put this plus there until I actually know what I've got. So it's a positive 5 times a positive 8. That's a positive 40m. And a positive 5 times a negative 7 is a negative 35. Okay, so now I need to combine like terms. I've got an m and I've got an m. So that's 70m. They're both positive, so it's just positive. And I've got a negative 36 and a negative 35. When you combine negatives, you get more negatives. So my answer is negative, and it's just going to be a larger negative. That's negative 71 if you put them together correctly. So negative 70m minus 71. So jumping to number 10. Multiply here. Multiply here. Where you need to be careful on this one is when you see this minus, that's a negative 3 times both of these. Okay, so just like this is a negative 7 multiplied times both of these, this says minus 3, but it's like a negative 3 being multiplied times both, because you could always change this to plus negative 3, and it's being multiplied. So here we go. Let's run it. Negative 7 times 2 is negative 14. This counts as a negative 4. So a negative times a negative is a positive 28v. Negative 3 times 7 is negative 21v. And then negative 3 times positive 3 is negative 9. All right, here we go. Combining like terms. Positive 28, negative 21. So that's going to get me a positive 7v. And a negative 14 and a negative 9 is a negative 23. Okay, last one. We need to be careful. These count as negative 1s, both of them. So when I multiply here, it's like multiplying times a negative 1. I'm going to pause the video to show you the next step. So jumping here, this was a negative times a 1 is a negative 1, and a negative times a negative gave me a positive. This also counts as a negative 1 being multiplied here, so I get negative 7, and a negative times a positive 4 is a negative 4. So now I need to finish this off. I need to combine like terms. These go together and get me negative 2v, and then this goes together and makes a negative 5. Okay, so when you see these negatives or minuses, they count as a negative 1, and they can be distributed to all the terms on the inside just like any other number. Go ahead and try the ones on the back.